Welcome to Godsplaining, Contemplative Preachers, Contemporary Age. Each week, join the Dominican friars as they consider all things Catholic.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Godsplaining. My name is Father Patrick Mary Briscoe, and I'm joined today by Father Joseph Anthony Kress. Now, you might think, if you're looking at us on YouTube, that you joined the wrong podcast because we have decent setups, but rest assured, dear viewer, if you're seeing this, listeners, you haven't noticed a difference, but rest assured, dear viewer, you are in fact watching Godsplaining. Father Joseph Anthony, how are you?
Very, very bearded right now. It's been a while since I've trimmed up my beard, but yeah, it's great. As I was kind of mentioning before we started recording, I got a little bit of a retreat hangover going on right now. Most people would call these things retreat highs. We just took our students on our fall retreat. So we're recording this immediately after that. We just took our students on a fall retreat. It was amazing. We did a theology of the body retreat, kind of digging into our humanity, understanding how we are, created in the image and likeness of God incarnate and what all that stuff looks like. Amazing. When you go on a retreat, at the end, you get that retreat high. You're carry me into new lands, and it's beautiful. I think when you give a retreat or you lead a retreat, it's more like a retreat hangover. You're just exhausted and you're gassed beyond belief. So that's where I am right now. But Jesus is doing big things among our students, and it's beautiful. So I'm excited.
I think that's how moms and dads feel at the end of vacation, right? They've just given everything, and now they need a vacation after the vacation. Because they've tried to do so much, have gone from place to place, right? But you, the spiritual father on this retreat weekend, just having given it all. No, I love it. I have no reason to be tired. I'm doing my job, but yeah, there you go. So I'm just gonna have to pass over that. I will say this. So as a lot of our listeners, our friends of the podcast know, I recently moved to Washington, D.C., taking another assignment from my provincial. I'm now the editor-in-chief of Alatea. And along with that particular deputation with that particular ministry, I was reassigned to our House of Studies, to our seminary. One thing that's just been incredible is the chance to just really live the liturgy in such a rich way. At the House of Studies, there's so many things that are just so beautiful about the way the brothers chant the divine office here. And I mean, for me, it's just been like drinking out of the fire hydrant, right? It's just an incredible wellspring. So I'm really grateful for that. And it's been a real joy in my life of late. So that's kind of all the personal news I have.
It's super rich. It's like the filet mignon of our province.
That's right.
Full flavor,
It is wonderful. Well, but let's jump into our topic today. Father Joseph Anthony, we wanted to talk a little bit about baptism. I mean, one of the things that I heard a lot as a parish priest up in New England, and I don't know if it's just a cultural phenomenon there in the Northeast in the United States, but I suspect not. I suspect this is increasingly present throughout the United States, throughout Western Europe, is this argument that we shouldn't be baptizing our babies, right? Parents will say things like, well, I want my child to be able to choose the practice of their religion. So this question of whether or not parents are going to baptize their children is coming up more and more increasingly more and more with more and more intensity. So that is kind of how I see us kicking off this episode with this desire to answer this question: why should a parent baptize their child?
I mean, that question, you're not wrong. I mean, we hear it all the time, I think, in any parish across the United States, just because it's probably a little more intense and frequent in New England, but it is super common elsewhere. People are like, well, I don't want to force anything on them. It's just kind of, maybe there's sociological differences with parenting and the family and all these things, but I think at the end of the day, it's this kind of push to emphasize choice And the only way to make a
Right.
legitimate choice is if you have all the options in front of you. Now I have all my options. I can make an informed decision and choice. And that's a whole nother episode, probably. Not probably, definitely. But it's this approach to religion as matter of taste, right? Do what feels good, like whatever works best for you. I mean, it's a phrase that I hear all the time in campus ministry and the university culture is, oh, that's good for you. I'm happy for that for you, right? And parents don't want to, because they themselves kind of have that mentality and that approach to all of life, then why wouldn't they approach the faith in that way? I don't want to impose. Impositions are a horrible thing for anybody's human freedom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for them to decide what's good for them and then let that happen. So there's a lot of culture influence, and I think the devolution of our cultures with respect to religion and the spiritual life influences us a lot. But it is something that we're seeing on a regular basis. Any takes on that?
Yeah, hearing you talk like this makes me think of the line in Screw Tape Letters, right? C.S. Lewis' famous book, where the older, more experienced demon is training up the younger demon, right, giving him advice on how to tempt the patient, as they refer to the human being that they're trying to lure from God. Yeah. So the line that I'm thinking of is when the older demon is encouraging the younger one about using only the historical method of examination, right? So he says, well, if you're looking at religion, asking religious questions, they should consider only the historical information. They should consider details about authorship and dating and context, and the patient must, at all costs, be prevented from asking his or herself whether or not it is true.
Yeah.
Whether or not their reading is true. And I think that's a question that I want to raise first as we consider this question of baptism, particularly the baptism of children, right? Why baptize my kids? Because one of the things that I think is a big problem that we're facing is parents who are not ready to say in their own hearts, yeah, I think it's true. I think Christianity is right. I think the Catholic Church is the fullness of truth and has something to say about the destiny of human life. So I think people are being prevented from asking this question of whether or not it's true by wanting, to inform themselves, which is not a bad thing, right? Be informed, study other religions. All of those things are good things, but one must look at the question of Catholicism and confront this question, whether or not they think it's true, and then act accordingly. But I think immediately the temptation, this doesn't really resolve anything, but it just goes back to what you're saying, is that there's a kind of paralysis of analysis, the desire to continue to look and make sure, that I've studied enough that I really understand what is being asked of me, or do I really think that this is true? Do I really want my child to live this way? That what I'm bringing up here doesn't really solve what you're pointing out, but I think it's just one more symptom of the disease we're facing, or the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, there's also that kind of because the parents themselves struggle with the faith, which is not a problem. I think far too many people think that they have to be perfect and buy in and just become these automatrons and robots of yes, everything is good. Catholic faith or nothing. And it's well, it's true. I mean, it is the truth, but it's okay to struggle with the faith. And they're I can't give something to my child if I'm struggling with it myself. If I have doubts or I have questions, I can't give it until I fix myself. I can't give it to this child, because he never asked for it. Why would I give him something that I'm not fully bought in with? And we have to kind of take away that element of, we can struggle with our faith. We can have questions. We can have doubts. How many times did people in the Gospels approach Jesus with doubts, with questions, but they approached him with deep faith?
Right.
That's not a barrier to faith, having questions and doubts, especially for Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And then we can imitate and we can hand that on to somebody even while still struggling ourselves. I think there's this parent that I have to fix myself. I have to be convicted of myself before I can give it to this, child who has no choice right? And then that's, once again, that their dignity only is reliant upon their ability to choose. That's a whole other issue. But like,
yeah, that's right.
I think
that's another huge part of this question. Yeah, you're nailing it there.
So, yeah, I think that's the first thing. I mean, we can start digging. The other thing that I wanted to mention quickly is I see a problem with understanding the human person,
Right.
in
Okay, say
the
more.
beauty of our humanity as body and soul. That like we are not separate. We're not this like soul that's entrapped within our body. We don't own our body. We are our body, right? But we're also completely spiritual. Like this is the beauty of humanity, body and soul made in the image and likeness of God. You see parents taking care of their children's physical needs. They'll feed their children. They will make sure that their appointments for their 3-month checkup, their 6-month checkup, all of these things with their doctors, make sure their health is okay. They take all the necessary, inoculations and all this stuff. Like there's this huge emphasis to do these things for the physical well-being of their child that the child has no choice in, is not cognizant of. But others have said that it is important to feed them smashed up, sweet potatoes because sweet potatoes are better than anything else, right? And yet they refuse to give their child the spiritual nourishment that they need and the spiritual medicine and salvation that they need, even if the child isn't cognizant of it. Like there's an inability to prioritize the physical needs where the spiritual is just going to be left dormant to fend for itself. Like you wouldn't take an infant and drop them into like, I don't know, the food court at the mall and say, well, there's nourishment all around. He gets to choose. Like when he's able to choose and figure it out, then he's going to find, the Subway that is to eat fresh. You don't do that stuff. I mean, those would be very negligent parents, and they have the responsibility to care and make the decisions that are the best. They research and they have their doctors, the pediatricians, the specialists, and say, okay, this is what my child needs. Well, so too for the spiritual well-being, because that's also the human person, body and soul. It just blows my mind that it's like, well, we're just going to wait off until it's fine. It's like, no, the grace and the nourishment, the faith beginning in that child from an early age is deeply important.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, because we're sort of spending the first part of this episode just working out what parents are thinking, the objections we've heard, right? Father Joseph Anthony serving in Charlottesville at the University Parish of St. Thomas Aquinas from my time in St. Pius V. We've had all these conversations with people, and we're just sort of working them out here. I think the last thing that I'll say about this question is actually kind of a positive one. It's that I think the hesitation on baptism it hints to us, in a positive way, because it could just be laziness, right? I could be wrong about this, but the best way to look at this scenario, I think, is to see that people still understand that baptism does something that's irrevocable.
Oh yeah.
And so if parents are unwilling to baptize their children, what's the best spin I can put on this? It's that they understand that by baptizing their children, they are in fact undertaking the commitment to raise them in the church, to hand on to them Catholic life, to endow them with a vision of Christian living, to take them to Sunday Mass each week, to teach them about the sacraments, to lead them how to pray. Okay, so in the best case scenario, the best interpretation, the most positive interpretation of this phenomenon we're facing, this question, is that parents understand that there's something real here, that you can't be unbaptized, that to baptize a child is to do something permanent and to change, and in so doing, to change the horizon of their lives. That's maybe not a bad thing, but it is a complicated thing, right? Because you say baptism is permanent. That's true.
Yeah.
So if we're looking
but it also makes a demand. Yeah, it makes a demand on the parents too, because they're like, oh, does that mean I have to adjust? Do I have to start going to Mass now too? Because I've said it on this kid's behalf. Maybe I should do that too. So it is multifaceted, and it is kind of a big thing. But I think you're spot on. There's this kind of recognition that baptism is a big thing, And it
So
has
I think
impact.
there's a lot to be said, and maybe there are other things that Father Joseph Anthony and I are not seeing, or things we haven't heard from our priestly experience. But I think it's important to consider these and many other questions as parents are asking. Well, why baptize my child? To understand, especially if there's someone in your life that you're talking to about this
Mhm.
question, to understand where they're coming from, to think critically about the situation, and to take their concerns seriously. I think that's so key. So that's what we're trying to do here. And then, but we've done enough of that, so we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll give you our reasons. We'll talk about why we think you should baptize your kid. Um, so give us just a moment, and we'll be right back with you.
You are listening to Godsplaining. Visit us at godsplaining.org to listen to our episodes, shop our store, and donate to our podcast. All gifts go to improving the podcast and bringing the gospel to more listeners. Thanks for your support.
Well, friends, welcome back. You've been listening to Godsplaining. In the first part of the episode, Father Joseph Anthony and I, of course, have kind of been working out this question of why parents hesitate to baptize their children, where they're coming from, trying to see the question that they're asking, the way that they're asking the question, the concerns that are behind this question. But Father Joseph Anthony, let's say someone comes to you and they ask you very directly, why should I baptize my child? Where do you start in your answer? What kinds of things do you offer to flesh out why the church baptizes infants?
Honestly, because you love your kid, right? Like you love this child, and
Mm.
there's something so beautiful and like there's something about the innocence of a child that really melts your heart. Like you can take a newborn baby and like put him in the arms of like the Harley Davidson motorcycle guy, big beard, and then he just melts. And there's something beautiful about that. So like, yeah, you love your child and you're going to want to give the best and do the best for them. And so this is the beginning of that, and is introducing them into, the life of Jesus Christ, who is giving us the promise of eternal beatitude. And so that can begin early on. We look at a child and we know that we all carry you could even say, I don't know, the hereditary share of Adam in our original sin. And so to give that child the opportunity to be forgiven of that original sin at earliest moments as possible, and have them reborn, regenerated in Jesus Christ, to enter into his death and resurrection at an infant stage, an early stage, is you do that because you love your child, first off.
Mm.
And I think that to see this act of allowing that child to be claimed by Christ, enveloped in the grace of an identity of Christ as the eternal Son, and to remit and take away that stain of original sin from the earliest moments. If the parent is able to do that, why wouldn't they do that? Because this is the mark of love to do such a thing. So I think that's where I start off, is actually admitting that baptizing your child is a great act of love and a parental love for that child.
Yeah, that's right. This is the best gift. You want to give your child every good gift. Like, think of all the time you spend researching. What are those things called? The little kangaroos, the Roo guys, those little baby machines that kind of rock them. Mamaroos. You're like, everyone wants a Mamaroo. Maybe not everyone wants a Mamaroo. Like, maybe they're
Those
terrible
little,
now. I don't know. I can't keep up with this stuff.
The strollers that are like Swedish made. Like,
yeah,
I don't know
right.
why Sweden has the best strollers, but they do.
Peg Perigo, the Italian version. So like you spend all this time as a young parent researching this stuff. I sort of hear about my sisters talking about it, as they look into what they want for their kids, for their families. But the desire is overwhelming, as Father Joseph Anthony is saying, that when you love your child, you want to give them the very best that you can give them. And in the spiritual life, the very best you could give them is baptism, to initiate them into the life of grace, to begin that saving work of God. And that's extraordinary. So I think that I would myself in these conversations, I prefer to lean more heavily on the doctrine, right? To say like it or not, your child, who is very cute, all babies are cute. Like it or not, your child is a potato sack of original sin. Little flour bag, I guess not quite a potato sack. That's too big. Little flour bag of original sin, right? And that's just the fact. That's the Christian claim of reality, is that, as Father Joseph Anthony was saying, we have inherited a disease from Adam, and the disease is sin, and the disease will cause us to die without the cure. And that's just the straight facts. That's a really important claim, I think, and I think it's important to say seriously, because this is the answer. This is the philosophical answer Christianity gives as to why the world is so messed up.
Yeah.
To say that there's sin and suffering because of this perennial brokenness, which dates all the way back to the turning of our first parents away from God, and that it's the turning away from God, the kind of sin that invades our lives, that's what causes the brokenness we experience in reality. And the answer, therefore, is the life of grace. The answer is Christian living. The answer begins in the saving graces imparted by holy baptism. And I think that that's a really key place to start, because if a lot of Christians are asking, well, is it true? Do I believe this is true? It's important to raise that question to parents and say, well, do you think this is true? Like, what's your answer? My answer for why the world is broken is because of all of the brokenness that I see. And I think that God has responded to this brokenness and saved us and given us a remedy for it, and that you should give that to your child. Okay. So Father Joseph Anthony, if you had to give an answer, you say like, okay, but we're going to move on now, and we're going to say, look, this is it in the scriptures. What would you point to?
I mean, the entirety of the life of Jesus, the entirety of the Old Testament. I mean, everything is pointing to this moment of redemption through the redemptive waters. Like, you can look at, all the prefigurings of baptism in the Old Testament, the parting of the sea, and I mean, the striking of the water from the rock, and then crossing the Jordan again with parts, and that's a whole other issue. But it's everything is pointing towards baptism as being the fulfillment of the Old Covenant. And how was, right? This is so important. How were individuals initiated into the Old Covenant? Through circumcision, and that was always done as an infant. And so even the Lord himself, right? I always look to seeing the Lord's life and say, okay, we're called to imitate his life, and what does his life look like in so many ways? Well, even as a child, right, as an infant, he was presented in the temple to fulfill the demands of the Old Covenant. And so that he could fulfill and then redeem and renew them in unique ways. And so this whole idea of infants being drawn into the work of God, the redemption of the people of God as an infant, is deeply known throughout the ancients in the Old Testament, and even into the life of Jesus himself. He's not exempt from any of this either, which shows his unity with that, because actually, out of anybody, he is exempt from it because he doesn't have sin. But he enters into that process to show us the way that we are to imitate. So this kind of redeeming of the infant has deep, deep roots in Scripture. I would be hard pressed, right? There's a real wonderful point out there, but I'd be hard pressed to see how, if the Old Covenant that is happening throughout the people of Israel, of circumcision entering into the Old Covenant, included children and infants, why would the New Covenant that fulfills that not include that either? Like, it would seem like that would be a lesser covenant then, when we know that's not the case. Like, the New Covenant is the all-encompassing covenant now that brings it to its completion and fulfills it and takes it into deeper reality. So it would just seem weird for me that our entrance into the New Covenant would exclude infants then.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's really powerful. To that, I could only add that Jesus gives a direct witness to this in his life in the New Testament, in his preaching, right? I can think of two instances that I would add, because everything that you're saying is dead on. And this is and is, in my view, the key theological principle. So I can only add, like, because Jesus said so. Joseph Anthony's giving you a very sophisticated theological vision of the covenant, and I can just say, like, look, the Lord says, do it, right?
Yeah.
So we can look at the situation where the children are trying to get to Jesus, and Peter and the apostles are like, no, Jesus is too busy to talk to kids, and Jesus says, let the little children come to me, right? instead of pushing them away, the Lord invites them to himself. And I think that's important. That moment is significant, and a principle is imparted to us there. I think also we should look at Jesus' vision of the kingdom, where he tells us over and over that the kingdom belongs to such as these, to the children. Like that's that same instance where the children come unto him. Or when Jesus warns us, unless you have the heart of a child, you cannot enter the kingdom. So there's something about being childlike and being dependent on the Father and adopting the posture of a child that is at the heart of Christianity. So if we say that this is true, that there's a kind of child-centric view of the kingdom that's being imparted by Jesus, I'm looking for the right words to express that, then we have to say, well, why wouldn't the Lord bring children to himself? If the view of the kingdom is exalted, why wait to be an adult? If the view of the kingdom means that you have to become like a child, why wait to be an adult to begin to partake in that?
And I want to add in this way, like this past Sunday, if we're looking at it's the 25th Sunday of Ordinary Time, year B, if you want to just roll back to that, Gospel of Mark, the Lord, in the midst of his apostles, takes a child and puts them into this presence. It's like, anybody who receives this child receives me. Anybody who receives me receives the one who sent me. So we see this love of the Father coming down, but into and Mark has this beautiful line. He says, Christ takes the child, puts it in the midst of the apostles, and then embraces the child, wraps his arms around. Mm-hmm. Like, is not just using this as an image for teaching pedagogical purposes. The Lord embraces the children. And I think that other aspect that you were talking about is like, why would we wait for this maturity? Like, if the image and entrance into the kingdom of God is to be childlike, it's beautiful because like our spiritual maturity actually goes in the opposite direction of our physical maturity. Physical maturity, as we get older, we want to become more independent. We want to do our own thing. But spiritual maturity actually looks like a greater dependency, a greater trust, a greater innocence. And so like you have this child who is at this peak of kind of physical immaturity, but in a beautiful way is at the peak of spiritual maturity. And has a greater disposition in, reception to the spiritual gift at that early stage that then can grow throughout the rest of his or her life.
Yeah, that's right. And to that, I can only add, that's what St. Peter's getting at, in the book of Acts, where he's preaching very early on in the book of Acts. In the second chapter, he's preaching, right, encouraging his hearers to be baptized, to receive all the gifts that Father Joseph Anthony is talking about, receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, receive all the spiritual graces of baptism, the many wonderful things that happen when divine love begins rather in those first moments to make its dwelling place in the soul. I mean, just incredible. There, St. Peter says this promise is to you and your children. And that there's a fulfillment of promise here that is expansive, that it belongs to you, it belongs to your children, it belongs to your children's children. And that they're being incorporated in this immediately, that all of these gifts are theirs as soon as they're born. I don't know. You have any closing thoughts? I think we sort of flushed it all out.
Yeah, I think we covered at least what we wanted to say this time. I mean, there's always more and other ways, other avenues we can go, but I think this is an important reflection, and personally, I hope it forces us individually, but also our listeners, to reflect on our own baptism. Like that's the whole purpose of this, is to reflect on the great gift that our parents gave us if we were baptized as infants, and to thank them for that, and to also thank the Lord for those of us who have been baptized as infants. I myself included. I throw myself out there. I was baptized as a little child, knee-high to a grasshopper. But to thank the Lord for that gift at such an early stage.
Preach. Well, to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube and seeing the glories of our new video presentation, congratulations. If you like what you're hearing, please share the podcast. We really appreciate that. You recommending the episodes is the fastest way that we grow. Please share them on social media, text an episode to a friend. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I don't know. What else?
That's what, yeah.
We don't have stuff coming up. No, I just paused, like waiting for Father Jacob Bertrand, to tell me about the announcements, to tell me, why didn't you write these down?
Somewhere in the universe, he's twitching. He's like, there's announcements to say. I don't know why.
That's right. Visit our website. Check out all of our projects there. Consider becoming one of our many great benefactors that support our project on Patreon. We thank those of you who already do, who give to us to continue to improve the quality of our program. Please know that we're praying for you, and we ask your prayers for us. God bless.
Thanks for listening to Godsplaining, a work of the Dominican friars of the province of St. Joseph. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Leave a review on your podcast app. And visit us at godsplaining.org.